Thank you. So I will start with welcome remarks for everybody, distinguished speakers and guests, my dear friends and online participants in the Asean region, ladies and gentlemen. Again, I'm pleased to welcome you to the series of webinar organized by Non-Violent Peace in the commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. Our tremendous thanks to the mission of Canada to ASEAN for making this event possible, and to the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation for their special participation and support. For making this event possible, and ASEAN Institute. Overall, the aim of this webinar is to provide key input and highlight the essence of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 within Southeast Asia and share its context in our modern times, including the COVID-19 situation. The webinar will be held weekly every 2 until 4 o'clock in the afternoon for the whole month of October, featuring different topics and lineup of speakers composed of women, peace and security experts, and advocates from ASEAN member states. We have already 2 webinars before, on October 7 about women peacebuilding initiatives in the time of COVID-19 pandemic, and we have also peace and security as defined by women in Southeast Asia. Today we will present the global agenda on the UN Resolution 1325 and the relevance of unarmed civilian protection in advancing women, peace, and security in the region. And next week, finally, we will talk about the role of women in post-conflict in peace process in Southeast Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like also to welcome our community participants of Indigenous People Women of KMMKM in Bukitmun who are watching with us now. And I believe by participating in the webinar, you are already making a difference. For your information, we are going on live stream also this webinar on the Facebook page, Non-Violent Peace Force. Before I introduce our moderator, Ambassador Reslan, please let me invite you to watch our short movie that will show our work on civilian protection. Mar?
At the beginning of the 20th century, the majority of fatalities in conflict were soldiers. And when we fast forward 100 years, and the majority of fatalities are actually civilians. And so the way we approach peacekeeping and civilian protection has to shift. Like South Sudan, where since December of 2013, a very serious civil war has displaced millions of people and tens of thousands of people have been killed. When women are moving out to collect firewood or to collect water or other things that they need, they're often targeted for sexual violence as a way to use rape as a weapon of war. In most cases, we see no incidents of violence as long as they're with a protective accompaniment team.
It was quite a surprise. People with weapons coming in saying like, you guys go. And we said like, we're not leaving. They would hit the women and children. If we had a gun in those instances, we were like an armed peacekeeper, we probably would have been killed.
very much. So lastly, please let me introduce you to our moderator, Ambassador Reslan Zeni. I will read his short bio. Ambassador Reslan Isharjeni is currently the Executive Director of Asean Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, or usually we call IPAR. Previously, he was Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Indonesia to France, Andorra, and Monaco. Concurrently, the Permanent Representative to UNESCO from 2010 until 2014. He was Director General of Multilateral Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs Indonesia from 2007 until 2010. He also served as Ambassador or Permanent Representative of Indonesia to the United Nations New York from 2004 until 2007. In addition to the above assignment, Ambassador Reslan also served as head of Indonesian delegation to the senior official meeting between Indonesia and Timor-Leste on the implementation of results of the Commission of Truth and Friendship, 2008 until 2010, and chair of the Peace Committee of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, on the Southern Philippines, mediating the talks between government of the Philippines and the Moro National Liberation Front on the implementation of the 1996 final agreement. The duration of the assignment 2007 until 2012. Ambassador Reslan, we would like to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to facilitate this webinar. I give this forum to you, Bapak. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ronnie, for introducing me. And it's a great honor to be moderating this very important webinar. Of course, the issue is close also to the work of the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. Before perhaps we go into introducing the speakers and the reactors, I would like to take a minute to introduce the institute that I'm heading, the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation, which I have the privilege to be the executive director since October 2017. The ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation is part of the ASEAN community building process. It was established under the ASEAN Political Security Community Blueprint 2009-2015 to strengthen research activities on peace, conflict management, conflict resolution, and reconciliation. And through its many activities, the Institute is contributing towards building a caring and sharing, people-oriented and people-centered ASEAN community. And the Institute, in line with its outlook as a people-centered and people-oriented ASEAN community, it's not only a state-centric institute, but also a people-centric institute. This, of course, is reflective in the characteristic of the Institute as an intergovernmental body, but at the same time, in its activities, it is more of a 1.5 track process. I think this feature is unique in ASEAN, and it gives certain space and flexibility for the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation to be a platform where issues that is considered sensitive to be discussed in track 1 might be discussed under the formulation of research and study. In fulfilling its mandate, the Institute The Institute is also given certain functions. Among others are, of course, the functions of research, capacity building, pooling of expertise, and support for ASEAN bodies, networking and dissemination of information. The Institute has, of course, great interest in the role of women as an important stakeholders in peace processes. In securing, I think this is important, in securing the inclusivity in peace processes, the ASEAN IPR in 2018, end of 2018, has launched what is known as the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. This registry is an answer to the call of the 2017 ASEAN leaders statement on promoting women, peace, and security in ASEAN. The registry consists of 27 women coming from different lines of work and expertise related to peace and reconciliation. And one among its important mandate is to assist in peace processes and reconciliation efforts in member states at the request of a member state and based on consensus. And the activity that the ASEAN Institute has taken in the past that relates to women is the ASEAN Women Interfaith Dialogue, with the theme of promoting understanding for an inclusive and peaceful society. It was held in Jakarta in November 2019. The activity itself is the first interfaith dialogue of women in ASEAN. Of course, women voices and narratives are imperative to be heard in peace processes and peace-building efforts, considering their positions and multitask role in the society. So, being a moderator in this webinar is, of course, a call that is very important for ASEAN IPR because we are talking about inclusivity, we are talking about women, peace, and security. And today we have a great line. We have a line of great speakers. And we have also important friends who would be reactors to the speakers. So I would be introducing them, of course, one by one later when I give them the floor to speak. But before that, I would like to commend Nonviolent Peace Force for taking this initiative. I would like to also acknowledge my good friend, Delcy Ronnie, and thank him for including me in this webinar. Okay, now, the first speaker would be Rina Setiawati. She is now the Deputy Director for International Peace and Security from the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We were together in New York at one point, so she is a colleague of mine, but of course, much younger than me. But she has been taking up important position, be it in Jakarta or in the mission abroad. Two of them is the permanent mission of Indonesia to the United Nations in New York, and the other one, and the last one was in the permanent mission of Indonesia to the United Nations in Geneva. So she is a true multilateralist. So I think she is the one that is really the person. And by the way, she is also currently assigned as the head of the United Nations Security Council Task Force of Indonesia, and therefore has has of course presented the Ministry of Indonesia to many UN and non-UN meetings and conferences on political and security topics. She will be talking today about global agenda of the United Nations Security Council 1325 and its prospect, and its coincides where Indonesia this year is still a non-permanent member of the Security Council. Rina, you have the floor.
Terima kasih, Ambassador Jenny. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation and Nonviolent Peace Force for convening this important discussion. It is an honor for me to be able to join these discussions, and I think our discussion today is timely as this month we are celebrating 20 years anniversary of Resolution 1325, the landmark resolution of WPS, Women, Peace and Security. And I hope today we can, our discussion today can contribute to our effort to strengthen and accelerate the implementation of Women, Peace and Security agenda. May I ask Carmen to share my PowerPoint presentation, please? Yes. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, distinguished participant, ladies and gentlemen, since the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 20 years ago, the international community has committed to shifting the paradigm from women as a victim of conflict to women as an agents of peace. And international community also committed to pushing forward the active involvement of women and in peace and security decision making, and promoting the role of women as part of solution in the conflict situation. However, women are still facing daunting challenges from structural to practical. We know that female voice is often ignored and underestimated, which resulting in ineffective women participation, and also a lack of an enabling environment that will lead to low number of women to apply or being recruited to take part in the peace process. And moreover, the numbers of women participation in the field are still low. The data from Council of Foreign Relations reported that between 1992 to 2019, women constitute only 13% of negotiators, 6% of mediators, and 6% of signatories in a major peace process. And female peacekeepers currently constitute only 6% of uniformed military, police, justice, and correction personnel in the UN peace operation. And yet, women involvement in the peace process provide comparative advantage that will enhance sustainable peace. The involvement of women will bring a broader perspective and increase inclusivity and diversity that can help addressing a wider range of concern. Women, of course, they have a unique approaches and are exceptional at soft approaches, and women also have a better situational awareness. The role of women in the earliest stage of peace process will ensure their active and meaningful participation in the whole peace process. Women can play a role as a catalyst for mediation in ongoing and potential crisis, and mainstreaming gender equality into future development and part of longer-term measures to peace building. Next slide, please. Distinguished participant, Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security and its subsequent related resolution are really relevant for Indonesia in the context of outward-looking through our contribution to peacekeeping operation in international conflict under the purview of UN Security Councils, but not in the context of social conflict in one particular country. The inclusion of women and children in the implementation of women, peace, and security agenda is an integral part of community empowerment. And this is will contribute. This will contribute to local communities' resilience and the establishment of an effective platform of sustaining peace in post-conflict situation. So promoting the role of women in peace process is part of our diplomacy for peace. It reflects our effort at national level in empowering and advancing women's role, and it also serves as our commitment to foster women's meaningful participation in creating sustainable peace as agent of peace and agent of change. And women, of course, as an agent of peace, is a valuable asset for our foreign policy. We are the few that women involvement in the agenda of peace and security is an integral part of community empowerment to achieve sustainable development. And this is also in line with our effort to fulfill sustainable development goals 2030. Our diplomacy for peace in supporting women's role and participation is manifested through comprehensive effort in a wide-ranging spectrum of foreign policy. First, our commitment to contribute to UN peacekeeping operation by sending a female peacekeeper. I'm pleased to inform that we currently deploy around 156 women personnel out of 2,838 personnel from military and police force to 7 UN peacekeeping missions. And since 1999, we have deployed more than 570 female peacekeepers to various UN missions. And in this time of pandemic, we witnessed that female peacekeepers are in the front line to assist host countries in providing assistance to local community to address COVID-19. As part of our commitment to increase the numbers of women peacekeepers during our presidency in the Security Council last August, we initiated Resolution 2538 on women peacekeeping, which adopted by consensus and supported by 97 UN member states. And this is the first UN Security Council resolution ever that specifically addressed the issue of women in peacekeeping. This resolution calls for a concerted effort to increase the numbers of women peacekeepers in the field, while also ensure in supporting the enabling environment for them in the mission. And the resolution is also contain a provision on the importance of training and capacity building for women peacekeepers to overcome capability gaps with male peace personnel. And this resolution also contain a provision to strengthen network among female peacekeepers. And in line with our effort to increase female peacekeepers, we also committed to continue reforming security sector by increasing the recruitment of female officers. Second, we continue to support women's role in peace process as negotiator and mediators. We need to involve more women mediators and negotiators to allow the peace process to be more legitimate and sustainable. And according to International Peace Institute, women can increase the likelihood of sustained peace by 35%. And last March, our foreign minister, Minister Retno Marsudi, has initiated the establishment of Afghanistan-Indonesia Women's Solidarity Network. And we also take initiative to propose the establishment of Southeast Asia Network of Women Peace Negotiator and Mediator, which hopefully can be launched at the end of this year. Indonesia is of the view that women can also play the role in preventing radicalization and countering terrorism, especially since women are no longer seen merely as the victims, but also the perpetrators. And in various international forums, we continue to encourage women's significant role in terrorist rehabilitation and reintegration process. And I'm pleased to inform that Indonesia and Australia, as a co-chair of Global Counterterrorism Forum Countering Violence Extremism Working Group, is now in the process of drafting a gender policy toolkit as a part of the implementation of Women, Peace and Security agenda. In bilateral context, we remain committed to put forward the agenda of supporting Afghanistan in advancing women empowerment. And in addition to the Indonesia Women Afghanistan Network that I have mentioned before, Indonesia Foreign Minister also the honorary members of Group of Friends of Women in Afghanistan. And last year, we held a dialogue on the role of women in building sustaining peace for Afghan women in Jakarta. So with the 20 years milestone that we have in the background, I think it is very timely for us to fulfill our commitment in promoting women's full and equal representation and participation in all levels of peace process and security effort. Next slide. Yes.
Because of time,
yes,
you have another 2-3 minutes for you.
Yes, Bapak, for sure. Okay. Now, last slide. So I think we all agree that WPS agenda is becoming more relevant than ever in the Southeast Asian region. So there are many more. I think there are many more women in the front line and the leadership level. But yeah. However, the challenges still persist in the region for the full and meaningful participation of women in peace and security. We note that the patriarchy social system still shape the nature of peace and security in the region. So it creates a situation that hinder local acceptance to women presence as an agent for peace, and also a lacking of political will, budget constraint, and structural deficiencies. Also some challenges that we are facing to increase women's involvement in the peace process. So therefore we need, of course, a broader, balanced and sustained multi-layered approach for robust implementation of WPS agenda. And to achieve that, plenty should be done ahead to promote WPS agenda in the region. We should raising awareness of the community on the importance of the role of women in the peace building and sustaining peace. And we should promote and expand the network of women who involved in the peace process and security sector in Southeast Asia. And to conclude my presentation, once again, I would like to reiterate our commitment to work together with all stakeholders, all relevant stakeholders, to increase women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in the peace and security. Thank you. Ambassador Yuri, back to you.
Thank you very much, Rina, for the very important remarks that you have given. Especially interesting is the Security Council resolution that was sponsored by Indonesia, Resolution 2538, Women and Peacekeeping. So this is one of the resolutions that I would also like to read after this. Well, let us move to the second speaker of today, that is Tiffany Easton, the Executive Director of Nonviolent Peace Force. And prior to being the ED of NP, Tiffany Easton was Program Director for Nonviolent Peace Force Middle East Program, and have been Country Director in South Sudan and for Sri Lanka. She holds a bachelor degree in Justice Studies and an MA degree in Human Security and Peacebuilding from the Royal Roads University in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And she's also studied peacebuilding in the field in Uganda and served as Country Director for Peace Brigades International in Indonesia. She will be talking about UCP P and UN Security Council Resolution 1325. Ms. Easton, you have the floor for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Your Honor, and thank you to everybody for being here today. It's a great honor to be with you. And as you said, I had the opportunity to work in Indonesia almost more than 10 years ago now. So it's exciting to hear about the developments from our previous speaker on this agenda in Indonesia and in the region. So a great honor to be with you all this morning and to be talking about this topic and being part of this webinar series. My topic is talking about UCP, which is unarmed civilian protection. So that's what we call the work that Nonviolent Peace Force does. So for those of you who might be a little bit less familiar with that, when we say unarmed civilian protection or UCP, we are talking about civilian-led strategies for reducing violence and increasing the safety and security for civilians who are affected by violent conflict. So you could say it's a toolkit of applied nonviolence that we use in all kinds of circumstances where there's violent conflict, whether it is and we talk about it across the conflict spectrum. So we can approach that there's a need to sort of reduce violence and address tensions that can escalate into violent conflict during active conflict, certainly, as we can all see, the very obvious situation, but also in situations where there may be ongoing tension, there's friction in certain areas, there may not be outward high-level conflict going on, but the risk of escalation is pretty high. And so we want to be able to work on prevention. And then at the other end of it is, of course, after violent conflict, is working with communities, with all of the local stakeholders to do that really long and difficult work that it is required to when a community or a location has been hit by violent conflict to return to a sustainable peace, a positive peace environment. So that's the work that we do broadly. And where it's really fits in so well with the 1325 agenda is inherently our approach with doing UCP work is that it is about being inclusive. It's about addressing and redressing the way power is used in society. And when we see violence is the ultimate abuse of power. It's the ultimate misuse of power. So all over the world, we see power used by different groups for different reasons, for economic reasons, for control. And then the real manifestation of that misuse and abuse of power, where there is a small group that holds the power and a big group that gets excluded out of the power, is really with the use of violence. So without even entering into the discussion around 1325 and women specifically participation, our approach really is about trying to rebalance those power and different imbalances and look at an inclusive level of participation. When there's an inclusive engagement, when all voices are heard, all concerns are represented, there is a much more stronger likelihood that violence is the least likely option to happen. So as there's space to be heard and space to be spoken. So that's laying the groundwork, laying the foundation. Now, when we talk about it from a women's peace and security agenda, what we know, and Rena, you did a great job laying that out, is that women are consistently not part of the peace and security agenda. And that's been true historically. So what we say in sort of casual terms or more layman's terms is it tends to be that the practice is those who have the guns get to be at the table, and those tend to be men, and that has been true throughout decades and decades and decades of history. And what the Women, Peace and Security agenda is attempting is to open up that space so that there's a broader representation across the group. Now, we try and avoid just suggesting that women should participate because women are naturally better at peace. Really the focus is women should participate because they are half of society. It's about an inclusive participation and the way that women live their lives and women experience their life in society. They're seeing elements and more details and more nuance in life within the family, within the community, that that often, not always, but often, that men get to see because of the different role that they're playing in society. So that's really the focus. So if we look at those sort of 4 elements of 1325, participation, protection, prevention, and relief and recovery, what we see is that there's the unarmed civilian protection, or UCP work, cuts across all 4 of those pillars. And depending on where we're working and what the situation is, we'll focus more heavily on one or the other, depending on what is needed. First and foremost, if we think about participation, again, Rena did a great job earlier talking about the statistics about how low those numbers are. 13% of mediators, 4 to 6% of peace operations. These are extremely low numbers, almost negligible. So we have a long way to go to work collectively to look at participation that is meaningful and that spans all of the strata, all of the layers within a community. So often what we will see is we will have some very active women, a small handful that everybody knows their name, they're the community leaders at the grassroots, and then you'll have 1 or 2 at the very high level. And everybody will say, but we have women, we have Ibu so-and-so or Madam so-and-so at the table, but it's 1 or maybe 2 women. And so, well, that is a move forward, and we're very happy to see that. What we're missing is really meaningful and balanced participation all the way through the grassroots, the regional level, the national level, up until those higher intergovernmental or international levels. So a lot of the work that NP does in the different locations that we work in is really trying to work wherever we might have an entry point, wherever we might have some connections or relationships or a little bit of influence at any of those levels to really encourage and trying to open up space for women to participate. And this is women from the communities and from the environments that are being affected by violent conflict. There's space for meaningful participation in all of those areas. And in order to really achieve balance, we need to see it balanced out across every single layer in order to have a really good, solid foundation. By the nature of our work, we do tend to spend a lot of our energy at the grassroots in communities. It's kind of the foundational approach from the work that NP does, because we're really oriented towards violence reduction in the moment. So we really encourage participation at the local level. This can look like something that is quite structured, like the formation of women's protection or women's peace teams at the community level, where women, and we've done this in most of the countries that we've worked with, where women are really come together around their own collective interest in participating in peace and security. We know one of the great things about 1325 has been that it's really been an attempt to identify women not simply as victims who are requiring third-party protection, but that identifying women's space in the peace and security agenda, and that there needs to be one. And so when we women are at the grassroots level really get involved in peace and security and start emerging as leaders in peace and security at the community level, and then starting to move up into the higher levels, that does really create an opening in space. And it can, what we've really been looking at is it can lead to overall reduction in violence that is aimed towards women, the more they're really seen and respected as peace and security leaders. So again, and we're talking about addressing those balances. Participation can mean many things. It depends on the type of conflict we're looking at. It depends on the type of environment, and really needs to be of the local culture, of the local practice, and really build upon what is already there to be able to be effective. So that's a critical piece of the work that is done. I would say protection is probably what we're most well known for. Did you have something? 2 minutes. Okay. I would say protection is probably what we're most well known for, and I would put protection and prevention together. It's separated in the resolution, and for good reason. I put it together because from an NP perspective, we say prevention is the best protection. So that's what we really want to be focusing on, is not simply reacting to violence after it's happened, but really focusing on preventing the violence before it begins. And there is a long-standing, sort of deeply ingrained belief that we've all grown up with, that we think that we need locks, we need walls, and we need guns to prevent violence. And that is a very narrow perspective, and it is also a perspective that tends to lend itself towards what is more a typically masculine approach to security, which is armed forces. The work that we do with UCP is really saying that based on relationships, based on using our whole toolkit of UCP that can be accessed by women, by youth, by men, whoever in society wants to use it, there is an opportunity to prevent violence before it happens, and to protect people in situations of violence, to alter the course of what's happening in a community if people are under threat. Those who might act on those threats might change their mind because of UCP activities, and those who are supposed to be working together to protect civilians might be more willing to take up their responsibilities to do protection. And when you see a group of women, I'll give really concrete examples. When a group of women arrive at the office of a local military commander and say, "Sir, we have the same concerns. You're concerned about the community, we're concerned about community, can we work together?" What we've seen is some pretty dramatic change in the approach of military actors in communities where women do tend to be at the receiving end of most of the violence that happens from there. So it's a long story. There's lots to talk about. There's lots of work to be done together. It's a great opportunity to share these ideas and stories together here today. And I look forward, thank you for the opportunity, and look forward to being able to work together more.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tiffany, for your very interesting remarks surrounding the work of the UCP work that NPC is doing, that cut across the 4 pillars of the UN Security Council 1325. Well, now we will move to the next speaker. That is Rachel Julian from NP United Kingdom. She will be presenting us with UCP research findings and recommendation. And but before I gave her the floor, I'd like to introduce to you her bio, short bio. She has been working in peace and nonviolence for over 25 years, and she is also a senior lecturer in peace study at Leeds Beckett University in the United Kingdom. She worked for NP from 2002 to 2017 as European Coordinator and International Fundraising Director. She has a PhD from Leeds Beckett University and has given presentation, talk, written extensively on civilian protection. Dr. Julian is running the first research council-funded UCP research in Myanmar and teaching civilian protection on the MA International Human Rights Practice. She is a facilitator for the UCP course with United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, and is also a board member of Peace News Trust. So I will now give the floor to Rachel Julian. You have 15 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Such a great opportunity to be here. And thank you very much, Ambassador and Nonviolent Peace Force, for organising this. I've listened into some of the other weeks, and it's just fascinating and such a wide range of views. I feel very honoured to be here with you all. So thank you very much. So I'm a I work in the UK, but I work across a couple of research projects, both in Myanmar and in Philippines with Nonviolent Peace Force. And I'm a professor of peace studies, but my focus really has been for nearly 20 years about unarmed civilian peacekeeping, and particularly looking at it from the experience of people who are living with that violence in violent situations. And I think one of the reasons I've stayed with this is because, as Tiffany's just sort of spelt out so clearly, that unarmed civilian peacekeeping is challenging quite a lot of unquestioned assumptions that exist within academia and within policy about protection and the role of women in protection and prevention. It challenges myths such as the idea that the myth that men protect women, and that we can challenge that, or that protection is always something which is done from the outside to people. So lots of that I'm going to talk about is about the way we do research, and also sort of like what we're looking at across sort of Myanmar and Philippines. Next slide, please, Moen. The next slide. Yeah, there we go. So one of the first things I want to just talk about is why we need research. And Ambassador, I'm so interested in the institute that you run, and I think there's sort of be a lot of common things about being people-centered. And I think there's a lot that we can learn about research provides us with the evidence, and it helps us learn about sort of how and why UCP works, how that community-based thing works, because it's quite new and quite different. And the research could, and I think one of the most important things is documenting the involvement of people who are often excluded. And I think it might not always be new. Everything that we find out through research projects might not be startlingly new. And obviously within this webinar, the idea that women are involved and should be involved and want to be involved in peace process isn't new. But I think one of the things that research is really important to have is that if we don't include and document the experiences and the work of women and other excluded communities in the literature, in academic work, in the way we think, then they're going to remain absent. So we know that women are capable, we know that women know what to do and they're there, but actually we need to be making sure that that's visible to everybody. I also think that one of the ways that we do this is really important. So process is really important in UCP. The way in which you work with communities, the way in which we are inclusive is really important to make UCP work. And I really believe that we can do that with the research as well. We don't have to suddenly use traditional methods where somebody comes in and decides what the topic is. We can actually use participatory methodologies within that. UCP is participatory, it recognises the value of local knowledge, it enhances capacity, and we can do that with research as well. So one of the things that we try to do is we try to have a more feminist approach to research. And there are many aspects of sort of like a feminist approach to things, but the two that I think are relevant here is one is the importance of valuing the experiential knowledge alongside the expert knowledge. So we can actually sort of like recognize that the people who live with the violence that we're trying to prevent or protect them from actually do know a lot about it, and we can value that and learn from it. But also a feminist approach of being participatory and listening acknowledges the power issues that are inherent. And Tiffany mentioned the sort of like the power issues within sort of like how violence happens, but there's also a lot of power issues between the researcher and the researched, and we can break some of those down. And there's also the civilian and unarmed, the idea that within non-violence, we all possess some of the knowledge in order to see the whole, and we can do that within research as well. We don't have to be have it as a two-way thing. We can actually collaborate, and by working together, we can see that there'll be new insights, not just as an expert. And by doing this, we have actually, so we've done these within both Myanmar and Philippines, and actually these methods, the participatory, the learning, the conversation, are really valued by the participants. They find, I mean, like the images and the pictures that we get back, it's all local researchers do this. So it's a collaborative process between the UK and the countries involved. And the pictures we get of women laughing and sharing together, and what we hear is that they value and they learn through participating in the research, doing these methods. So next slide, please, Maman. So the two projects that we are currently sort of working on and developing in Myanmar, this goes back a few years now, but it started in about 2016. What we were interested in, and the people that we worked with in Myanmar were an entrepreneur, an artist and a graphic designer. So we're capacity building within research, but we wanted to learn more about how the way people live connects to the sort of like the UCP methodologies of what they're doing. So what in that project, we had art workshops, and some people sort of like worked together for 4 days in an art workshop, telling stories and sharing as a methodology for trying to understand about fears and threats and hopes and what does peace mean. And we held conversations with artists, and we actually didn't go to any of the NGOs and agencies. We worked at the community level, and that produced a booklet of artwork explaining what people thought about it. And then in Mindanao, we wanted to understand, which is currently going on, we want to understand more about the roles and the tasks of civilians in monitoring the peace agreement. So like things like the IMT and other things. But we didn't start out by defining what we were looking for. We asked people to tell stories so that we could learn what they wanted to tell us about what they did, rather than us predefining what it was. And there again, using artwork and people sort of involved in the research themselves. Last slide, please, Maman. So I'm only going to talk about some of what we've learned because there is a lot that comes out. But I think the first one, unsurprisingly to everybody in this webinar, that women are essential, and they don't only play sort of like roles in their community, which might be about mediation or working with young people and coping with different challenges that they face, but they're also playing those leadership roles. And women recognise that. And I think one of the things that's really important is that when we ask people, what does peace mean to you? For women, peace means participating in the peace processes, whatever they are, whether it's sort of like local reconciliation or more national processes. But that's part of what peace means to women. Well, I'm not going to go say a lot about that because we've been covering a lot about that. But one of the things that we've consistently seen across Myanmar and Philippines and in other places as well is that there are many violences and that they're interrelated. So, and people are dealing with all of those violences together. So even though from a research perspective, even though sort of different agencies might focus on different types of violence and they become specialists in dealing with them, the people themselves, they experience a number of violences. And so one of the things that we can start to do is to start talking about not just people who live in violence, which I know I said at the beginning, but people who live with violences. So we can start to distinguish they live with domestic and drugs, with slavery, redo, armed conflict, many different things, but they experience all or some of them at the same time. So I think that's one of the ways in which we can build a new sort of way of thinking out of the research things that people have said. And then finally, this idea that, and again, relates very much to women's involvement, but that when we think about studying conflicts and violence, we're sometimes studying it as religious groups or through identity or ethnicity or men and women or young and old and stuff like this. So, but what we're seeing and hearing a lot from people is that family is at the heart. And actually sort of like the idea that the strong family unit as a way of sort of like breaking the cycle of violence. And absolutely, strong family units and community ties are part of sort of like the way in which we think and analyze conflicts and want to understand it, but also that people see a strong family as the basis for peace. And very strongly linked to that is the importance of including culture. So culture not only helps in understanding what's going on, but peace itself is about building those communities, and those communities are rooted in the different ways in which we think about peace. We also, by using culture within our research methods, by talking about art, talking about stories and things like that, we can start to build culture much more into the idea of how we research protection and how we research violence. So overall, I think there is a vast amount that we are learning, not only sort of like by working with sort of UCP organizations to do research, but also learning a lot about how we do research and how that research itself can be part of creating new conversations in which people can share what they think about peace, and in which women making methods in which women can fully participate as a step towards being able to do that. So that's how we see this fitting within to sort of like women, peace and security, but also within community structures. And it's very underrepresented within academic literature. So there's a lot that I really look forward to sort of like being able to work more on this and seeing where it leads in the future. So thank you very much. Really interesting, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much. We have to thank you, Dr. Julian, for your presentation. I mean, the methodology that you have taken in your research is really something very important and interesting, especially because you are really basing on the stories of those people who are living day by day in a conflict situation. And the other one is that culture, you said, is also a source of strength in maintaining peace. But therefore, I think to build a culture of peace is one area that is of interest to this to my institute, the ASEAN Institute for Peace and Reconciliation. Thank you very much. Now let us move to the next speaker, that is Minister Dixon Hermoso. He is currently the Minister of Transportation and Communication of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. He was a former Army General and Ground Commander in Mindanao prior to being appointed as a member of the Government Peace Panel. He was co-leader of the Humanitarian Peace Corridor during the Marawi siege in 2017 that rescued trapped civilians at the height of the armed conflict. And I'm very happy to see again, even though virtually, Minister Dixon Hermoso, and because I remember he was one important speaker during our seminar in Jakarta, together with the United Nations, and we talked about many cases, and one case that he presented was the case of Southern Philippines. Nice to meet you again, General, and you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, magandang hapon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Well, my courtesies to the following. Program Coordinator, Ms. Maria Carmen Gatmaitan, and the women and men supporting her leadership. Nonviolent Peace Force has been a civil society partner both by the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in ensuring the agreed civilian protection mechanisms. We work in the Bangsamoro communities. Their participation in the overall peace process serves as a legacy of genuine partnership and stakeholdership in pursuing peace in the Bangsamoro. Thank you for making me a part of this webinar series. This event refreshes my concrete experiences as we deal with civilian protection in the overall Bangsamoro peace process. My courtesy to Honorable Ambassador Rislan Ishar Jenny, our moderator, who gave us a very informative message pertaining to our event. To our panel discussant and reactors, Ms. Tiffany Easton, Ms. Rosme Kabaki, His Excellency Noel Serbigon, His Excellency Artuali Tubing, Dr. Julian, Professor Chantana, and lastly, Ms. Amina Rasul Bernardo. And she is known to me as one of the peace champions, not only about Bangsamoro, but in various capacities as well. Indeed, I am grateful being one of the discussants of this webinar as we commemorate the 28th year of the UN Security Council Landmark Resolution 1325. Again, my appreciation goes to the event organizers and the participants for making the UN Security Council resolution adoption memorable. On my part, it is relevant and timely because here in the Bangsamoro, we are in the process of implementing the government MILF Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro, or CAB, highlighting provisions of civilian protection, both in the political and normalization track. May I have the second slide, please? Where am I coming from? Born and raised in the conflict area of Mindanao, my experience being born and raised in Mindanao has been an enlightening process. I have witnessed the cyclical war and peace resolutions in the Bangsamoro in Mindanao. I just hope and pray that the present peace overture puts a definitive end to the conflict. Experienced the war at the height of the Moro rebellion. My deeper understanding of the centuries-old conflict, dubbed as Moro rebellion, tells us of the legitimate right-based people assertion that need appropriate response within the ambit of what is legal and cannot be resolved through another violent action. This has been true in many occasions. The martial law and subsequent total war and all-out war approaches and means did not result to the resolution of the conflict. These approaches even develop more complex problems such as, number one, loss of lives, both the parties in conflict and ordinary civilians. Number two, damage to properties. Number three, displacement of individuals and communities. And lastly, deeper animosities and biases. An active participant to war and peace resolution. Being a state actor belonging to the security sector for most of my professional career, the realities mentioned above heightened my resolve that there must be an end to the hostilities for our future sake. There can never be victors in the cycle of wars. The ultimate loser is the ordinary civilian populace, whom we have actually vowed to serve in our reason of existence as peace champions. Slide number 3, please. The Mindanao peacekeeping and peacebuilding. State security gains its belligerency when there is mutual acceptance. My realization is that armed peacekeeping is necessary, but simply tactical, if not complementary by nature. In fact, the presence of state armed security cannot be all and everything, especially in peacekeeping and civilian protection. It takes the community, the major stakeholder, to define and to decide how they should manage and protect their lives peacefully. On our context, we have become effective because we have won the hearts and minds of the community. And I would like to insert how the armed forces of the Philippines mutated on its paradigm shift from winning the war to winning the peace starting in 2000. I was part of it, and I saw how it transformed into such as peace builders. The armed forces detail generals in the peace mechanism that can easily sway the subordinate commanders on the ground. And the armed forces put up the first Armed Forces of the Philippines Peace Process Office, and yours truly was the one who established it in the Armed Forces of the Philippines in Camp Aguinaldo. It's similar to the office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process, which is also copied by the Philippine National Police. Deeper knowledge and acceptance of the roots of conflict. This has become binding when the communities think and feel that the security stakeholders have deeper understanding of their sentiments and aspirations. We do have to show to our people that there is respect of their assertion. This leads us to the understanding that peacekeeping and peace building in Mindanao and the Bangsamoro, for that matter, must always be anchored to the much higher goal, that is, the resolution of the centuries-old Moro assertion for the right to self-determination. The feeling of empathy is important, but political resolution through process of negotiations and consensus building among stakeholders is a paramount consideration. That is what we are putting premium now as we implement the various agreements between the state and the Moro insurgents. There is another consideration as participant in peacekeeping and peace building. One should have the attitude to be optimistic, the optimism for the resolution of the conflict peacefully. It has become my principle that a political problem can be resolved by a political action. Armed peacekeeping should not be our strategic objective, but seeking political solutions. The Bangsamoro peace process is a concrete example of a process that goes beyond peacekeeping. On civilian accompaniment and protection during the times of war and peace, my actual engagement of cyclical war and peace can be a journey of accompaniment and protection of civilian populace. Though my infantry orientation and tradition connotes violence, approaches, and expectations, my operational guidance is always the welfare of the civilians. Yes, I do admit this is difficult, but to have preferential option to the civilians during war and peace times is the ultimate consideration both in the civilian and military institutions. It cannot be simply a matter of putting into policy directive, but actual journeying with peace actors and stakeholders. On keeping and building peace, both personal and institutional responsibility. Finally, we should take the whole process as both personal and institutional responsibility. We are already into the implementation stage of our peace process. The challenge is even more gargantuan. We need to ensure that all interest groups and institutions have a place and platforms for engagement. No one can exclusive. No institutions should be left behind. We have to onboard individuals, organizations, and institutions in the process as we journey to people whom we have considered marginalized, and those are basically the ordinary civilians in the community. Now, next slide, please, the last one. In my practice in peacemaking and peace building, my officer, 17 years of that I spent in peace building. And I identified that the problem is not the armed group. The problem is the scourges of society as shown in the screen. Soldiers cannot kill ignorance. Soldiers cannot shoot poverty. They are not the solution. There are injustices in this more than 4 decades of fighting, and the wide gap of the rich and the poor. Of course, the onset of illegal drugs, which is an informal economy that also fuels rebellion. And we have in our midst now terrorism. And lastly, I would like to emphasize this, bigotry. Let me take an example. Are you familiar? If you are familiar with the Mama Sapano killings of 44 policemen, most of the widows and orphans, when they were brought to Manila, and there are lots of help coming from all directions for the widows and orphans of the 44 policemen. But when I go down and also talk to the widows and orphans of the 18 Moros belonging to the Bangsamoro Islamic Freedom Fighters and the MILF and the ordinary Moro civilians that also died in that conflict. They asked me, the widows, how can they feed their children? How can they send them to school? The only thing that their husbands, sons, and brothers is on the other side of the Mama Sapano Bridge fighting the policemen, and they died also. One thing that I wasn't able to provide an answer because they told me that they are also Filipinos. Now they saw the cascading of supports to the 44 sub-policemen. How about them? And that to me is part of bigotry. Another example that I would like to share with you is my work during the Marawi siege. I stayed there for 5 months, taking orders directly from President Duterte, to extract or get trap civilians in ground zero and provide mobility corridor for the coming in of relief goods, medicines to Marawi. And I learned from them in my 5 months in Marawi, those Maranao folks who are rich, plus the money, that flee to the adjoining cities would like to also rent houses owned by Christians. And you know what? They were outrightly denied because they were Muslims. Isn't it bigotry? So this is one thing that we need to address, because even in the international scene, there is also that perceived divide between Islam in the West, and we have it here in our midst. So that is the short of my presentation. Thank you very much for viewing me and listening to my 15 minutes presentation. Wassalam.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you, Minister Hermoso, for your presentation. Very interesting to see a presentation from someone who is really involved and in the history of the Bangsa Moro in Mindanao. Now we have concluded the 4 speakers, and we are now moving towards the panel of reactors. And perhaps in order to save time, I will lump together the bio from the 3 reactors, so I would not have to read it one by one. But the first reactor would be Amina Rasul Bernardo. She has a very long involvement in peace processes and peace initiative. She is a member of the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry of ASEAN, the ASEAN IPR, and she is, of course, now the president of the Philippine Center for Islam and Democracy, and also members of a number of boards in the university. Many universities of Mindanao, for instance, and the University of the Philippines Foundation. The other panel of reactor is Dr. Chantana Basirichot Wunggayo. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. Is a retired professor from the Department of Government Faculty of Political Science, Chulalongkorn University, a very distinguished university in Thailand. And her doctoral training background was in regional planning and resource development. The research interests of Dr. Chantana has been on democracy and development, political crisis, peace and conflict resolution, and recently sustainability and transition. At present, she serves as a member of the academic committee for Peace and Conflict Studies Center at Chulalongkorn University. She is also a member of the think tank research working program on strategic nonviolence. And the third reactor is Dr. Timo Kivimaki. He is a professor of international relations and leader of the conflict and security research cluster at the University of Bath, United Kingdom. He joined the university in 2015, and previously he has held professorships at the University of Helsinki, University of Lapland, and University of Copenhagen. He is also the he has also been the director of the Nordic Institute of Asean Studies in Copenhagen, and also Institute of Development Studies at University of Helsinki. In addition to purely academic work, Professor Kivimaki has been frequent consultant to the Finnish, Danish, Dutch, Russian, Malaysian, Indonesian, and Swedish government, as well as to several UN and European Union organizations on conflict and terrorism. It's nice to meet you all virtually, and now I give the floor to Ibu Amina Raso to be the first reactor. Please, Ibu Amina, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Reslan. I hope all of you are keeping well during this time of pandemic. Unfortunately, for those of us who are hard at work at keeping peace strong in our communities, the global pandemic has shifted the priority of governments and multilateral organizations to health, as it should. But the unfortunate impact has been, as Minister Dixon rightly pointed out, there's a rise in bigotry, and this has a tremendous impact on faith-based, ethnicity-based conflicts. And worse, it also has a very negative impact on the effectiveness of government security systems. All you have to do is to turn on the television and watch CNN to see remarkable developments in the United States. And I cannot help but feel that perhaps the Nonviolent Peace Force has a lot of work to do in the United States itself. What worries me in the case of a country like the Philippines, for instance, where clan wars known as Ridu in Muslim Mindanao has been, shall we say, unchecked. And we also note that the two bombing incidents in my hometown of Jolo may also be a product of a weakening of the security system. And the passage of the Anti-Terrorism Act, I don't know how it can positively improve our security system when communities and peace advocates, human rights advocates fear that the arms of the state may be using this Anti-Terrorism Act to, in many ways, muzzle their advocacies, for fear that such advocacy could lessen the popularity of government. Globally, we're seeing the rise of more authoritarian systems, and all of these authoritarian systems the world over also has a very negative impact on making our communities more resilient to the lure of violent extremism, because the fear is out there that state will use all powers to, in many ways, neutralize the rightful demands of communities that are at risk, maybe because of faith or ideology, gender. Some of the comments that I have about the presentation, we absolutely agree that awareness raising is critical. And this is true in Southeast Asia as well. Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore have established their national action plans for the prevention of violent extremism, following the agreement not just with the UN but with ASEAN. But there are countries that don't have. Malaysia, for instance, doesn't have an action plan for prevention of violent extremism. For the countries that do have a national action plan, the gender perspective is a little weak in some of them. And I sadly note that my own country is one such country where the gender perspective is not as strong. Second, we also agree with the first speaker that we need to empower women's networks. And I think here, UCP and the empowering of women's networks will have a very synergistic, symbiotic relationship. The idea about having a genderized peace-building toolkit is a very good idea. And I would just like to volunteer that the network I belong to, called the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, whose secretariat is ICANN, the International Civil Action Network. It's in Washington, D.C. We already have such a toolkit, and I believe that my network would be very happy to share it with our communities in ASEAN. With regards to the presentation of Ms. Isham, when she calls for the capacity building, for instance, of religious, of women in the community level, as based on the research, we would like to note that I think one of the key women's groups that would provide tremendous value to such an effort would be those of the women of faith, the women who teach in the madrasa in Christian and Catholic communities. We're talking about the nuns and the lay sisters, because these women have established very good connection, very strong rapport with the communities. And if we could empower them, build their capacities to be part of the network that would provide training so that citizens can be part of this unarmed civilian protection program, I think that would have tremendous returns on our investments. When we take a look at research, the ASEAN Women Peace Registry has already noted that research is something that is critical if we need to know not just the situation, but how to develop programs for peace building, for conflict resolution. And such a research would have to look at the situation of women in the conflict areas, and even in non-conflict areas, because there are issues that cause armed violence, such as drug wars, political violence, especially as elections draw near. So such a research in ASEAN, looking maybe at case studies as well as surveys on the situation of women and how they react to the conflicts that are in their areas, I think this will also be valuable to the development of programs to empower women to become part of peace building. Minister Hermoso did a tremendous job in securing Marawi and helped tremendously in lifting the siege. I think Minister Hermoso may be a little sad to note that it has been 3 years after the end of the siege, but the situation of those who were displaced hasn't really improved very much. And perhaps this is something that BARM can really look into, because as we all know, and as he pointed out with these drivers of conflict, if we do not address the poverty that has erupted, injustice, ignorance, the lack of education, this will now become the fertilizers for a new growth of violent extremism in our communities. And I will stop there, Pat Reslan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Amina. Now, let us move to the second reactor, that is Dr. Chantana. Dr. Chantana, you have the floor for 8 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's really a privilege to be part of this webinar. I really appreciate all the speakers who are provided both broad and insightful information, especially for me who are not a researcher in women's studies myself. So it's quite useful. I've heard a lot of a normative thinking of the role of women in peace and security. And also at the same time, we have heard on the realities on the ground from the research and the action plan at national level. After 20 years, I never doubt of the justification of these resolution 1325. It's quite strong and it's very imperative. And the new question will be the change making. So after 20 years, anything change? I see that the resolution provided a very important landscape for change. And until now, we've observed that not every country has national action plan. Not to mention that action plan itself might not be so effective. So I think the next question should be how to make change. I see that we talk about women represent a paradigm shift. I think this leads to the idea that maybe not really maybe, I think strongly that the civilian protection should be a very important entry point for women to play a great role. Not that this is a new thing, but it is a way to consolidate what the activities that women have been doing on the ground in conflict areas. So this entry point can be can really get stronger by the role of women. But you see, this has to do with a lot to do with norm setting, whether the whole ASEAN country are changing towards that norm. I see the role of women as the transforming agent. So in particular, because the women are active agents themselves, the problem would be that whether women are really visible. I have a feeling, even though there are many networks, women work hard on the ground, but we don't hear much about the perspective of women on ongoing conflict in the region. Maybe we are starting experience. IPER has done, women dialogue on interfaith. We are expecting some more voice of women to make them more visible in peace and security. Then I look at what are the challenges. I think everyone recognizes those challenges in different ways. I think when we talk about peace infrastructure and the role of women, women taking double roles. We not seeing they exerting their role, but we should also see that there are problem of their trying to perform their role. Southern Thailand, for example, we have heard a lot of women going to depression because of their heavy load, of works to do both family and a public and private sphere. So the question of peace infrastructure should take into consideration of to support the role of women, which I haven't really heard people talk about a lot about on that. So my last point that I want to see is maybe maybe we can expect a statement of women on certain situation at the regional level as providing as a landscape for change making at the local level. And I think maybe this should be a good start, that the civilian protection would be an entry point for women to take a role of conflict transformation in the region. I see also that people recognize that women has also to go through self-transformation as well. And I think that this already addressed, by all the speakers, that awareness raising, capacity building still need to be done. I appreciate that we are not talking about protection from open war, but there are also violence that in many different dimensions, meaning that women are dealing with a structural problem as well if they have to reduce violence, and that is very much related to social transformation. They are dealing with many different subject of structural violence, and the idea of scourges of society proposed by Hermoso is really a point to transcend. And I think the role of women with the entry point of civilian protection would really serve well as the stepping stone to encounter those problems. Thank you. That's all I have from now.
Thank you, Professor Chantana. Thank you very much for the points that you have made, reacting to the speaker's presentation. Now we will be listening to Professor Timothy Vimaki as the third reactor, and you have 8 minutes, Professor.
Thanks, Ambassador. Thank you also all the speakers for excellent talks, very interesting, and thank you for organizers for inviting me. We have basically heard from every speaker, first, that women are important in peace building, and secondly, that women should not be just objects of protection, but as protectors, as actors of protection. Now, Tiffany told us that this is not because women as such are peaceful and men are violent. There are plenty of violent women and even more non-violent men. But it's simply fairness. Women are half of the population, so therefore they should be involved in peace process as well. Now, Rina also explained another reason for involving women as protectors, and that's because that's more productive. That's more effective. She said that that there is an increase of 35% of likelihood of success in peace building if women are included. And the next question is, why is this? Rachel explained a bit of this. She explained that knowledge from local experience is often brought and broadened by female participation in peace processes. And this, I think, brings us closer to what Minister Dixon Hermoso said about deeper knowledge of the root causes of conflict. I think Rachel also mentioned that stronger family units often bring success to peace processes, and then she said that without female participation, without considering women as actors of protection, we often fall into this myth of men protecting women, which is actually something that often mobilizes violence. Now, in my latest two books, I have looked at I have basically looked at discourses of protection from texts. And those texts I have correlated then with developments of conflict fatalities, basically meaning that I can then see what kind of approaches work and what kind of approaches do not work. And I think lack of female participation in protection often brings in what I call stereotypical masculinity, which actually is very problematic to the success of peace processes. I'll start with this this thing that Tiffany also talked about, the myth of men protecting women, which often mobilizes and justifies violent action also. Now, even in the UN, which is supposed to be quite inclusive and supposed to be quite kind of non-violent organization, even there, whenever the UN discourse focuses on civilians versus the predators that need to be checked and destroyed in order to protect civilians, protection is often less successful. Whenever there is that idea that there are bad people that need to be contained and completely innocent civilians who need to be protected, this very simplistic narrative normally brings escalation rather than de-escalation of conflict. So in fact, actually, I could calculate that the UN peacekeeping operations all over the world managed to save more than 30,000 more lives in those years when they don't talk about innocent civilians against kind of predatory enemies that need to be contained in order to protect. Another thing is this power centricity, this muscular approach to protection, which is actually kind of countered by what Tiffany talks about this civilian-led non-violent protection. It seems to be that whenever protection is viewed as something that is against somebody else, that is, we need protection against this and that intentional threat, intentional enemy, that's also when protection also often fails. Whereas, for example, in the UN discourse, when protection is linked closely with development, that is when there's clearly more success in saving lives. So quite clearly, this stereotypical masculine approach. It's not a masculine approach. I don't think that all men support that kind of approach, but it's this stereotypical approach which often brings failure. And then thirdly, it seems that whenever the agent or the object of protection is somehow seen in opposition to the threat, that the intentional threat that this object of protection needs protection from, that's also when protection often fails. This idea that we have us and them in protection is actually very, very problematic. There's clearly less lives saved when this is the main orientation, whereas when we protect people also from hunger, when we protect people also from environmental threats, that's when we often also are more successful in protecting people from violence. And I have a quotation, one of my favorite quotations, which I think will end up my comment is from the United Nations Security Council meeting on the 12th of January 2007, actually by our moderator, Ambassador Reslan Jenny. He said then, in the context of ASEAN, we have engaged Myanmar on this issue. The issue was in this issue, not on a you and I basis, but on the basis of us as a regional organization in the process of transforming itself into a security community bound together by shared values, including and especially the values of democracy and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. I mean, this approach, which is also quite typical for the United Nations, that assumes that basically most parties want to protect, that they need to be supported in protection, rather than taking an approach that there are bad people that need to be destroyed and good people that need to be protected. This kind of stereotypical idea of what Ambassador Reslan called you and I idea is actually clearly correlated with increasing numbers of fatalities in conflicts, and as such, it's one of those things that I think female involvement in peace processes can help, because it takes away some of the stereotypical masculinity in protection. Thank you very much.
Very much, Professor Kivimaki, especially with the last quote that you mentioned. It really brings happy memory, good memories of me in the United Nations. Thank you so much. Now we come to the question and answer session, where we have compiled a number of interesting questions in the chat box. And perhaps I would be taking 3 questions, and then after the response, I will be taking another 3. We have around 40 minutes left for our webinar. So the first question is addressed to Professor Rachel Julian. And the question is, what are your challenges in working with Myanmar communities? Are you able also to build the capacity of researchers in Myanmar, and of course, including women researchers, I believe? The next question is perhaps or can be answered by Tiffany or Professor Rachel, Julian also. How does Nonviolent Peace Force conduct its work during this time of Bangsamoro Transition Authority, and the pandemic. Do you continue to do actual field work? And the third question is to my colleague, Rina Setiawati. The question is, in as much as Indonesia already have a WPS National Action Plan, what do you think should have been done correctly in order to have a better national action plan? So perhaps for these three questions, first to be responded by, I mean, of course, those questions are addressed to specific speaker, but if other speaker would like to jump in and add, you are most welcome. So now first to
Shall I answer?
Professor Julian.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, it's a really good question. So all of the research that we do is very collaborative, where sort of like our part from the UK is a part of it, but the other major part of it is that there are local people, and sometimes they're already experienced researchers, but sometimes, as you say, with capacity building, we discuss and talk with them about the ideas of research and different ways of doing it. So Myanmar is very challenging for anybody working from the UK to arrive there. So we were limited in where we could travel and things like that. So but we were working with people from Yangon, so with an artist and entrepreneur, and so they're the people who sort of like stayed there, lived there and ran the workshops and gathered data and taught that. So and then we supported them in that. So we worked through any questions they had and discussed it, and then also sort of like worked with them so they could learn how to manage and analyze the information that came out and work with people. And that process means that we can actually people in areas that are often hard to reach for international researchers can do that. And it's all about sort of like building capacity, well, recognizing the capacity of people to actually do that. And then so almost seeing research as a set of skills that you can learn. And we're specifically doing that. We're just starting a new research project. So Nonviolent Peace Force Myanmar went on to develop their own research project. And now we're working with them to actually provide research training so that women in their networks across Myanmar and with different CSOs are able to learn how to do research and to carry out their own small research projects, so that we're actually gathering up evidence, which is the view of women themselves about their communities and what they need to do. So it's integrating the process with the research in order that it becomes more widespread. So absolutely, that's many challenges, but also just amazing. Thank you.
All right. Now the second question is about how does non-violent peace force conduct its work during this time of the BTA and the pandemic. Do you continue to do actual?
No, I'm going to hand over to Tiffany there, because she's much more current with what's been happening in the last 6 months. So thank you.
Tiffany, you have the floor.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm actually going to also hand it over to Ronnie Delsey, who's our head of mission in the Philippines, who can speak in greater detail than I can. Ronnie?
Yes, thank you, Tiffany. I just give a quick answer. First, that we follow all the protocol from the government, health protocol and also security protocol. Second, actually, since the beginning, we have office very grounded in Central Mindanao and also Western Mindanao, in Basilan and Sulu, right? So meaning that we interact directly with the people on the ground. And the third, that we have very strong network with the community. So even that, just for example, our program, early warning, early response, right? Even that we are working from home, but the information alert is still continue relay to us, and then we continue to the peace mechanism. So meaning that even that we cannot work normally 100%, but 60-70% we can continue our work, especially in monitoring the situation. And also, let's just say like a few weeks ago, we conduct also some training. Of course, again, that we follow the whole protocol. But in this situation, not 100%, but still 60-70% we can extend and continue our work on the ground. Thank you.
Sorry, for my misunderstanding. I thought the question was for Tiffany, but it was for Delcy Ronnie. Okay, maybe if Tiffany wants to add, or is it enough?
I think that's fine. Thank you so much, Ambassador.
Okay, thank you. So, Ibu Rina, you have the floor for your questions.
Thank you, Ambassador Jenny. Thank you, Aisyah, for the question. I think there is no right or wrong in developing a national action plan. The most important is how the national action plan would fit into the needs and the context of the country. For example, for Indonesia, we tailored the national action plan of WPS to fit into our situation and needs. So therefore, as I mentioned before, our national action plan has contextualized WPS agenda into context of social conflict. The other thing that important is also the period of national action plan that will allow countries to update the strategies and the policies, so it will be well targeted and bring direct impact to the society and further contribute to the protection and participation of women. We are currently drafting our second national action plan for the protection and empowerment of women and children in social conflict. And lesson learned from our first national action plan. In the process, we also involve all relevant stakeholders, including civil society. I think this is the key, because we understand that inclusivity is one of the key to the success of having a good national action plan that are implementable and well impacted to the society. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you very much. Now I will be taking some of the other questions. Now the question is addressed to Minister Dixon Hermoso. What is the program for the female combatants in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BAM? And why do you think it is still difficult to recruit females into the military service? And there is another question also for you, Minister Hermoso. What are the factors that made the armed forces of the Philippines successful in shifting paradigm from winning the war to winning the peace? And what is the key factor that make the government of the Philippines and Moro Islamic Liberation Front accepted the participation of civilian and established civilian protection component in official peace mechanism? And if the moderator may also ask a question, I would like to add to this question that is addressed to Minister Hermoso. Yes, the paradigm is, I mean, you have talked about shifting paradigm from winning the war to winning the peace. But talking about war, I think is talking more about war between states. I mean, here, in some cases, we are talking about conflict, internal conflict, where the word war is a bit different, and what is being done is to is having a process of facing the combatants, but also at the same time winning the hearts and minds of the people. And I think this two aspects can go hand in hand. And I think the UCP is part of the perhaps helping the government winning the hearts and minds of the people, and later on winning the peace? That is my question. Thank you. So please, Minister.
I have 5 questions and I'll try my best to answer all of those. Number 1, the female combatant in the Bangsamoro. For all you know, we have the normalization process right after our political aspect of having a peace agreement and the establishment of the Bangsamoro Transition Authority. In the normalization process, the Mujahidat of the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces are first to undergo the normalization process. I was once the chair of the Joint Normalization Committee and the Joint Peace and Security Committee, and first to be mainstream individually in the family are the women and children. So they're in the front seat and the process is ongoing. We are normalizing the lives not only of the combatants, but that includes their community where they reside. So our experience with the MNLF, we only integrate the combatants, but we didn't integrate the community. So the social component, the reintegration process goes hand in hand with the combatant, the female, the children, and the male, and then the community. For the female in the armed forces, yes, we have, before I left in 2016, there is an equal opportunity for women to join the armed forces. A certain percentage of the total number that we have, I forgot how much percentage, but there are lots of women now who even excelled in the Philippine Military Academy and the Philippine National Police, and even in the allied services, security services. So there is an equal opportunity for women, except that there is still a study if they can be put in the infantry, because the infantry closes in with the enemy of the state. So mostly they are in the combat service support and combat support units like the armor, the signal, the computer. But there are women now accepted in the infantry. So that's how we treat women in the armed forces. On the third question, the paradigm shift of the armed forces, I am a witness to this because I don't believe that we can end this conflict by killing all the rebels. Again, I'll go back to the scourges of society. That is why when we shift the thinking of our soldiers, because the orientation then, if you can recall that we were under martial law for quite a time, we need to shift the thinking of our soldiers that it is no longer finding the enemy, fix the enemy, and finish the enemy, and forget the enemy. No, you cannot win the people to your side. So we create so many peace champions. It is an orientation now in the armed forces that there should be peace 101 in all institutions. For all military officers and enlisted personnel to undergo the peace building courses. We are also being helped by civil society and non-government institutions in shifting our mindset. It is no longer the same before that you need to show as a commander body counts of your enemy, firearms you recovered, and that is how we gauge the commanders on the ground. But now it is not like that. We gauge the commander on the ground if his area of responsibility is peaceful. There's no bombing, there's no liquidation, because his way of reaching out to his stakeholders is he must talk to everybody, even his perceived enemy. So we are slowly, when I was then in the armed forces, changing this mindset. And oh God, there are lots of rejection, denial, because the orientation is different. I will take an example. I went to the Philippine Military Academy to lecture on peace building, my experience in my stay with the ceasefire mechanism. I told them that this is how we should do it. Talk to our people. They're not your enemy. The enemy is ignorance, poverty, injustice, etc. And I thought they listened to my lecture for 1 hour. And during the question and answer, they asked me, "Sir, what is the experience of a lieutenant on his first armed encounter?" Oh my God, I failed in my lecture. So that's how we gauge that we need to re-educate our soldiers, especially at their young age, at their young days in the armed forces, shift their thinking to peace building. And it is now bearing fruits. In Basilan, Abu Sayyaf is no longer felt because the local government unit, the security sector, is in tandem in addressing the basic problem. They give equal opportunity for the terrorists, Abu Sayyaf. Well, of course, as mentioned by Ma'am Amina, in Sulu, we need to do lots of peace work there. Now, the last one is the civilian protection components in the Bangsamoro. Well, the normalization process also includes transitional justice and reconciliation. Maybe the unarmed peacekeeping can join in that process, because I know that there are lots of mending and broken hearts. There are lots of widows and orphans as a product of the almost 5 decades of fighting. We need to close this story. We need to close this narrative. There should be transitional justice in order for us to move on in the next generation. And lastly, sir, this paradigm shift from winning the war to peace. Well, we take cue from the policy pronouncement of our previous presidents and the current presidents that we need to talk to all rebel groups, even to the communists. So when that policy cascaded down to the platoons, the squad, we need to check if all are towing the line, because you know the armed forces is hierarchical. They follow orders. So in my experience in the armed forces of my 30 years, everybody say peace, but underneath the table, they're kicking each other. There are lots of commanders on the ground that doesn't embrace this new paradigm. Well, we call them utak pulbura or powder keg mentality. They cling to what their orientation was in the past. So slowly, our armed forces now realizes that we cannot win this war by killing your fellow Filipinos. You need to reach out. You need to talk. You need to get out from the box. And we are doing it. And I know the armed forces nowadays is different 20, 30, 40 years ago. And we are winning the people to our side. And I can attribute this not solely for the military or the police, also the local government officials. Everybody should be in the pool of nation in addressing this problem. I think if I satisfy your question, sir, those are my answers. Thank you.
Very much, Minister Hermoso, for your response and answer to the questions being made. So we have around 15 minutes left, and perhaps we go for 10 minutes and 5 minutes more about the concluding remarks. So now the question is addressed to Rina, Ms. Rina, where please share with us what is Indonesian diplomacy in order to boost the role of women in peace and security in ASEAN or globally. Secondly is what is your experience in implementing UN Security Council Resolution 1325 action plan in your country that we can also learn, especially looking at how government and community accept or adopt that plan, and in dealing with and implementing in conflict affected communities. And there is another question which I don't which is like, This is very short. Can you share about Bantay Bayanihan?
Minister.
This is for Minister Dixon Hermoso. So, and
Mamrina?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, yes.
All right. For the question from Nyoman, Pak Nyoman Sudira. Okay. As I mentioned before, we have been consistently voice the importance of role of women in peace and security, and our diplomacy for peace in supporting women's role and participation is manifested through comprehensive effort in wide-ranging spectrum of foreign policy. At the global level, as we are now members of UN Security Council, Indonesia consistently support the discussion on the agenda on WPS in the councils. We were involved in the negotiation and supported the resolution 2467 last year on sexual violence and conflict, and we also co-sponsor on the resolution 2493 on WPS last year as well. And in every discussion of mandate renewal of UN peacekeeping operation in the council, we always ensure that the elements of protection of women and children are reflected in the resolution. And as I mentioned before, we also this year during our presidency, we initiated the first ever UN Security Council resolution on women in peacekeeping to promote the importance role of female peacekeepers. And in the context of ASEAN, in various ASEAN meetings, we consistently emphasize the importance of the momentum to promote more action lines related to measure in mainstreaming WPS in the agenda in the ASEAN. And as one of the members of advisory group in ASEAN, we continue to promote the importance to include WPS agenda in ASEAN long-term strategic planning. And in the case of the establishment of Southeast Asia for Women Peace, a negotiator and mediator that I already mentioned in my presentation before, although the launching has been postponed, we continue working together with the core members to formulate the terms of reference of the network before launching. And for second question, let me check, it's about the National Action Plan. Yes, from our experience, we have representative in the local government and communities to help us monitor and coordinate the implementation of National Action Plan on WPS. We have some indicators to see whether the implementation is on track. And as I mentioned before, involving civil society is also the key. So we engage civil society to ensure the implementation of the national action plans is in place. When we are formulating our second national action plan, we have consulted thoroughly with all stakeholders digitally. So this is will allow us to accept many input from local community as well. I think I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sorry, I was out of the webinar because of technical glitches, so I didn't know whether Minister Hermoso has taken the floor for answering the question of sharing what about Bantay Bayanihan. Has he?
Yeah. Not yet. Now
okay,
we will.
So, Minister Hermoso, you have the floor.
I would like to enlighten everyone about Bayanihan campaign plan. Uh, Bayanihan is, in English, is holding together, hand in hand. It was crafted not by the armed forces alone. It is by the whole of government and the whole of nation. So it has components on security, development, and political. Well, one of those that are being guarded is the peace process. The peace process, that there should be ceasefire among the different threat groups. Before, when we don't have yet the agreement with the MILF, there is an existing ceasefire. It is not only the everybody's watching that, even the third party monitoring team, which is the international monitoring team headed by Malaysia. And we also include in the Bayanihan campaign plan the briefing to the different Peace and Order Council, which is we have the National Peace and Order Council, the regional, the provincial, and the city and municipal, that everybody must know that this is how the government doing its peace work. So that is part of the paradigm shift. It is not only the armed forces or the police who shifted to win the peace. It is the whole of government. The one who drafted that is not, as I said, is not the armed forces. The different government agencies, the local government units, even civil society and the international NGOs that are invited to interact, they were the ones who crafted that campaign plan, and is still existing nowadays, and it has good result. Actually, there are NGOs that really do evaluation and analysis of what the government is doing now in winning the peace. So the only problem that we have now is, well, of course, it will end also, is the terrorism, but it is localized. It is only some parts of Mindanao. And of course, our talks, the up and down talks with the Communist National Democratic Front, but there is still room for that. And I know the president, it's one of his campaign promises that he will end all of these conflicts during his watch. So that is Bayanihan, or Bantay Bayanihan campaign plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Hermoso. I think there are a number of questions left, but I think because of time, we could not take those questions on board. And we have to wrap up this webinar soon. And before we conclude the meeting, I think I would like to give the floor to Tiffany Easton, the Executive Director of Nonviolent Peace Force, for some remarks, some closing remarks. You have the floor, Tiffany.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And yes, once again, I mean, I just want to take this opportunity to thank everybody who's participated, our speakers, the reactors, and of course, the masterful facilitation from you, Ambassador Reslan. It's been a wonderful event. I have been keeping note of a lot of really interesting comments, things we wanted to follow up on, and really important sort of things that are quotable. I think it really speaks to the quality of the speakers and the panel reacting about the level of investment and commitment and understanding of these topics, to see that the way that you've all been able to capture really complex and important ideas in really terms that are both very intellectual and emotionally provoking. And I've been incredibly impressed and motivated by being part of this group. So I wanted to thank everybody for this. I think there's a lot of work that has been done. I noticed some questions looking at how do we know what the progress has been in the 20 years since 1325 came into being, and a lot of thought about the work about where we need to go. So a lot of work has been done, a lot of work yet to be done. Hopefully through the process of these webinars, we can make more and more connections and increasingly work together and be inclusive and strengthened in that process. on our way to, as Minister Hermoso said, winning the peace for everyone. And I think that that's the spirit we should go forward with. So again, thanks to you all. Thanks for taking the time. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your thoughts. For those of you on Zoom and those of you listening through the live streaming from Facebook, thank you for tuning in. It's been great to have you with us, and we look forward to the next time when we can all meet again.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tiffany, Easton, for the closing remarks. For me, myself, it's been really an honor to moderate such a lively and very interesting conversation, discussion. And I've also learned a lot from this webinar, and looking forward for continuing discussion on this very important issue of women, peace, and security. And one important point perhaps that I would like to underline is that we have seen various perspectives on the nexus of unarmed civilian protection and women, peace, and security. That is one thing. And these are coming from these perspectives are coming from governments, practitioners on the ground, scholars, and researchers. So I agree with Tiffany. A lot has been done, but a lot more needs to be done. And for that, webinars or meetings and any discussion on women, peace, and security agenda is important to be continued. Thank you very much for non-violent peace force for having me as moderator. But before we disperse, please show a nice face, a smiling face for our family photo option.
Yeah.
Carmen, you have to.
Yes. Yeah, we will do the screenshot. Please put on all your all your beautiful faces on the screen, please. Mar will count on. Yeah.
We're waiting for a few more to turn the video on, yeah, so that we can have a
all right.
Hello from Sabah.
Yeah, hi. Very nice outdoor background, Ayesha.
Okay, so
bahay ko yan.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, ready?
Nice. Okay, ready.
Ready, 1, 2, and okay, one more.
I think we'll have one more. Another screen.
Okay.
Thank you.
One more.
One more, last.
Okay.
Wait a minute. Okay. 1, 2. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
And healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, Pak Reslan. Thank you, Fabi.
Thank you, everyone. Terima kasih, Pak.
Terima kasih, Ma'am Rina. Bye.
Bye.
Tony, see you in General Luna.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Timo, Pak Reslan. Yeah.
Thank you, Pak Roni.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you, bye, Richel.
Thank you, Carmen.
Salamat. Salamat po, Sir Dixon.
Sa susunod.